Thanks, Grace. I don't talk much, and now you get to hear me twice in an afternoon. So yeah, it's a high-level overview, and I'm probably not going to be saying anything new to a lot of folks in the room, but I figured it could at least provide some context and lessons learned from our kind of collective careers, I guess, of doing habitat restoration work here on the Middle Rio Grande, and which, you know, I've certainly been fortunate to be a part of since 2001. Anyway, I wanted to start by acknowledging some of the first projects. So the Albuquerque Overbank project, which the Bureau constructed in 1998, right here in the, you know, just downstream. And we were fortunate in that BAMP and the Heritage Program took this on as a long-term monitoring site. And so their lessons learned were very helpful for those of us that came next in terms of being able to predict what decisions we might be faced with, which management and maintenance issues may come up for us. And if nothing else, it provided a framework to start thinking for ourselves how we may approach some of these issues. Around that same time, John Taylor and Gina Della Russo were doing work down at Bosque del Apache, and there was ongoing work at Santa Ana Pueblo too, mostly focused on clearing exotic phreatophytic species and replacing those with native plant material. And those lessons were also critically important for those of us that came later, because we weren't starting from scratch. So it's interesting to look back at projects, at HR projects within this valley over the last 20 plus years, because overall they end up drawing from a subset of these typical goals. And they're also being constructed within the framework of ensuring that we're protecting the flood protection infrastructure, that we're maintaining conveyance and compact deliveries, and more so the self-adapting, resilient sorts of restoration are becoming more buzzwords or more goals or interests. Typically the on-the-ground activities are pretty consistent, where there's an element of fuels reduction or non-native invasive tree and shrub removal. We've certainly learned a lot about what works for different species over the years. And there's also typically some sort of herbaceous noxious weed treatments that either coincide or come before or after the woody vegetation management. When floodplain manipulation is a part of the project, then there's excavation, and in some cases, folks are also revegetating with, you know, native shrubs, trees, willows, grasses and forbs, and sometimes wetland plugs. Kind of typical photographs for what the sequence of events looks like in a floodplain restoration or an excavated restoration project is sort of like this, where it often starts with going in with a mulching tractor or some sort of heavy equipment, removing the woody vegetation. That's often followed by excavating the floodplain with varying types of heavy equipment depending on operator preference, haul distance, access, other logistics, etc. And when the project involves planting large volumes of, say, cottonwood willow plant material, we found that trenching with the trencher down to groundwater can be a highly effective way to install tens or sometimes hundreds of thousands of native trees into a site. And afterwards, it often looks like the picture on the bottom right, immediately following construction. This, has been discussed today, so I won't spend a lot of time with this, but there have certainly been a number of different engineering designs that are all aimed at really bringing the floodplain down to the river. And they also have, overlapping goals to facilitate inundation, to, promote natural recruitment of native species to benefit endangered species, et cetera, as well as to, address some of the geomorphic changes that have happened in this river system over the last, 70 or so years. Sometimes the engineering designs are also combined, like what we see here in this picture of recently constructed sites at Sevietta. This is a backwater with 3 inlets at the A prime site, a backwater at Unit B in a high flow channel that was constructed upstream, potentially to reduce some of the flow velocity entering the backwaters and also reduce some of the sediment transport energy into the backwater sites. Some of our notable successes include the volume of work. Like the previous presentation that I did showed, there's been, more than 2,000 acres of excavated floodplain habitat and, probably millions of plants installed. There's also been, hundreds of thousands probably of cubic yards moved in this basin. And some of these projects included highly detailed as-built documentation. So we're at a position where we can learn and adapt and modify, improve how we're doing things. Some of the projects like the Corps' Middle Rio Grande restoration project have had really high survival of plantings, where we're seeing more than greater than 90% of the coyote willows and greater than 70% of the tree poles and 60 to 70% of the shrubs that were installed are still alive and thriving at the sites. We've seen significant natural recruitment of cottonwood willow and certainly promoted overbank flooding. And as folks have talked about, there have been endangered species benefits. Here's some, just some illustrations or pictures of some of these benefits. And the picture on the left is from the Route 66 revitalization project, where, relatively minor but intentionally staged bank line excavation was able to facilitate, huge expanses of overbank flooding. The vegetation conditions, especially within sites that have been actively revegetated, have been, overall pretty positive, especially when they're coupled with promoting overbank flooding. And as as I said in the previous slide, and the picture on the bottom right shows, we are seeing that when projects are well designed and the inundations well timed, we are able to encourage natural recruitment of cottonwood willow. I guess over time, the projects have evolved. They've certainly grown in scale, shifted in focus towards more in the way of promoting flood inundation and less, in terms of just removing non-native woody plant material. Folks, including us, are now targeting lower discharges. So early on, we were using volumes like 2,500 CFS to as our design targets for promoting flooding, and now we're frequently using more like 800 CFS. Construction precision has certainly improved. doing a lot more in the way of RTK surveys, pre, during, and post-construction to validate two-dimensional hydrodynamic modeling to aid design and maintenance, adaptive management. And, you know, one thing that's interesting is the perceptions of the habitat value of exotic species certainly change over time. Back when we were first starting to do this work, you know, there wasn't a question about whether you should be keeping a salt cedar, Russian olive in the site. And it took some serious arm twisting to get folks to dig out Ravina grass. Thanks to science and learning, you know, those perceptions have shifted over time. We've also seen more formalized monitoring, maintenance, and adaptive management practices in action that help to guide these projects over time. Challenges, you know, none of these projects, as we've seen, last forever without maintenance. And, you know, we've seen recent, especially Ravina grass introductions. The vegetation response is highly unpredictable. And I think that's especially true when the timing and volume of runoff is less predictable. This picture on the bottom left here shows, you know, one of the MRG project sites immediately after construction when, you know, in 2012, 2013, runoff was early and low volume. And so it's just coated with elm seed. And so that's, you know, difficult to plan for. We don't know what the new normal is. Let's see, I would also say that exotic herbaceous species, I think I've learned are quite a bit more difficult to manage in a lot of cases than the exotic woody stuff. Grazing, off-road vehicles are ongoing challenges, especially in the Santa Casia Reach. I think some of the take-home lessons are mimicking the natural hydrology is critically important. And I think some of the reality, especially with climate change, is that it's going to require more in the way of operational flexibility and flow augmentation. It's very important to link the project goals to SMART objectives, like Todd had mentioned earlier. That helps to provide clear direction when you're prioritizing maintenance and management moving forward, and set measurable targets that you can monitor over time and decide whether or not a maintenance response is necessary. I recommend designing to benefit multiple listed species, and I think that's especially helpful because sites may evolve over time to benefit, say, birds, but you know, they may become, the mouths may become sedimented in, or the channel may fill in with sediment to where it may not function quite as well for fish. Say, for example, funding long-term monitoring, learn from previous projects, and adapt. And that's all I've got.
Any questions for Pat?
So when you do the bulk planting by trenching, how long are those trenches open? If they get covered soon enough, they don't become pitfall traps for reptiles, amphibians, and small mammals.
Yeah, so the trenches are cut the same day that they're planted, and typically the crew's on site cutting the trench while there's a planting crew following immediately behind. So we wouldn't leave trenches open overnight or anything like that.